The Cold War crisis between 1958 and 1979 was marked by a series of confrontations over Berlin, culminating in the construction of the Berlin Wall. The city of Berlin, divided into East and West, remained a central flashpoint in the Cold War, symbolizing the broader conflict between the communist East and the capitalist West. Despite attempts at diplomacy and negotiations, the unresolved tensions over Berlin eventually led to a drastic and unprecedented solution: the erection of the Berlin Wall. In the years following Khrushchev's 1958 ultimatum demanding the withdrawal of Western forces from Berlin, the superpowers engaged in a series of talks aimed at resolving the issue. However, these negotiations repeatedly broke down due to the intractable positions of both sides. The Western powers, led by the United States, refused to abandon West Berlin or compromise on their access rights, viewing the city as a critical outpost of freedom and a symbol of resistance to communism. On the other hand, the Soviet Union and East Germany were determined to stem the tide of East Germans fleeing to the West through Berlin, which was undermining the stability of the Eastern Bloc and exposing the failures of the communist system. By 1961, the situation had become untenable for the East German government. Over 2 million East Germans had fled to the West since the end of World War II, most of them through Berlin. This mass exodus threatened not only the economy of East Germany, but also its political survival, as it was losing a significant portion of its population, particularly young and skilled workers. In response to this crisis, the East German leadership, with the backing of the Soviet Union, decided to take drastic action. On the night of August 12-13, 1961, East German soldiers and workers began constructing a barrier that would eventually become the Berlin Wall. Initially made of barbed wire and makeshift obstacles, the wall was soon reinforced with concrete, cutting off all but a few heavily guarded checkpoints between East and West Berlin. The wall effectively sealed the border between the two halves of the city, preventing East Germans from fleeing to the West. It was a stark physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain that had descended across Europe, dividing not just a city but an entire continent. The construction of the Berlin Wall shocked the world and deepened the divide between East and West. The Western powers, led by US President John F. Kennedy, condemned the wall as a violation of human rights and a blatant attempt to imprison the population of East Germany. However, despite the strong rhetoric, the West realized that direct military intervention to tear down the wall would likely lead to a catastrophic conflict with the Soviet Union. Instead, Kennedy chose to make a powerful symbolic gesture by visiting West Berlin in 1963 and delivering his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech, affirming America's commitment to the defense of the city and the values it represented. While the Berlin Wall was a humanitarian tragedy, trapping millions of East Germans in a repressive regime, it also paradoxically helped to stabilize the situation in Europe. The wall effectively ended the refugee crisis that had plagued East Germany and the Soviet Union, and it provided a clear and enforceable boundary between the two halves of the city. By physically dividing Berlin, the wall reduced the likelihood of sudden confrontations or accidental clashes between Soviet and Western forces in the city, which could have easily escalated into a broader conflict. The Berlin Wall became the most potent symbol of the Cold War, representing the ideological, political, and military divide between East and West. It stood as a stark reminder of the failure of diplomacy and the human cost of the Cold War. For the next 28 years, the wall would loom over Europe, a constant reminder of the divisions that defined the era. While it stabilized the immediate situation in Berlin, it also solidified the separation of Europe into two hostile blocs, with the wall as its most visible manifestation. The Berlin Wall would remain in place until 1989, when the Cold War began to thaw, and the pressures that had built up over decades finally led to its fall, symbolizing the beginning of the end of the Cold War.